Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Properly? Properly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Two participant if not joined, sir, will get for 5.
Okay, okay, fine. Okay, okay, fine, fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you. I audible? Hello, Angani
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning, all. So, most of the participants have joined, so we will start the session. I request Ajit Kadam sir, please start the session.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
It's hand over to you, sir. Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. Good morning, all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
first, thank you, sir. So first of all, good morning, all of you. I welcome all of in second day of FDP on research methodology, uh, paper writing, and patent registration, organized by RIT Rajaramnagar Diploma. It's my great pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. S.R. Patil, sir, Dean of Quality Assurance, Associate Professor, Department of Automobile Engineering Department, RIT, Rajaramnagar. Now talking about qualification, sir has completed Bachelor of Engineering in Automobile Engineering in 1996. Sir has completed ME in Mechanical Design in 2008. Sir also completed PhD in Mechanical Engineering in 2018. Now talking about his professional experience, total experience of more than 21 years till March 2021. Out of 21, total teaching experience in 19 years and industrial experience in 2.5 years. He is currently working as an associate professor at Automobile Engineering Department of Rajarambapu Institute of Technology, Rajaramnagar. He is responsible for academic quality initiatives like NBA and NAC of the institutes in the capacity of Dean Quality Assurance. He has overseen responsibilities as head of the department and head of the PG program earlier. These are the courses delivered by him: electric and hybrid electric vehicles, automotive drivetrains, vehicle dynamics, automotive product development, automotive chassis system. Now research. Now talking about research interest, his research interests are magneto-rheological fluids and EMR devices, automotive engineering and engineering educations. I glad to inform you that Sir has published research articles in various Age Index and Science Citation Index international journals belonging to elsewhere, Springer's, Essay International, etc., as well as conferences of reputed like ASME and ACE. Till now, he successfully published 12 international journals and 6 Indian journals. He has also published book like Experimental Evaluation of Magnetorheological Brake for Automotive Applications and Simulation for Estimation and Magnetorheological Brake Torque based on fuzzy logic singular value decomposition using MATLAB. Now, talking about achievements, his course titled by Hybrid Electric Vehicles Performance and Environmental Impact is certified by Purdue University, Mumbai. Uh, he is also member of MIE and IST. Sir has also reviewer of various international journals like Elsewhere, SAGE journals, reviewer of ICTI conferences, associate editor of international journals like a Journal of Engineering Education Transformations. Sir has also member of BOS Automobile Engineering ADCET ASTA, also member of Department Advisory Committee Automobile Engineering ADCET ASTA. So we are indeed privileged to have hardworking technocrat teacher and a very humble and simple personality in higher education, respected Associate Professor Dr. S.R. Patil sir, Dean Quality Assurance, Department of Automobile Engineering, RIT Rajaramnagar. Thank you so much sir for being with sir. Now I request to Dr. S.R. Patil sir to start our today's session. Over to you sir.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Mr. Ajit Kadam, Professor Ajit Kadam. Thank you for the introduction. And I take this opportunity to say thank you to the organizers. At the same time, I'm appreciative of the fact that despite faculty of diploma programs, you have organized a very relevant program which deals with research in higher engineering education, right? Research aspects. Though the focus basically of diploma, as far as my understanding is concerned, is much on skills rather than research. But despite this fact, you are uh, you are working on elevating your research skills, and that is really something one should appreciate about, right? So let me share my screen with you and let's get started with the topic. Just give me 2 minutes. I hope that I am properly audible, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. Screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, fine. Okay, so let's get started. And today's talk is on getting published in scholarly journals. So this is the content, this is the outline of my presentation, motivation for research publications. So I'm going to talk on motivation, why one needs to have research publications, finding an appropriate journal. It is very important that you find out an appropriate journal when you are ready with your manuscript. So how do you find the appropriate journal? That is what we will talk about. Article structure, do's and don'ts. So when you write manuscript, what are the do's and don'ts that you need to consider? That also we'll go through. Very important aspect of publication is peer review process. So all these are peer reviewed journals. So let's try to understand basically what is meant by peer review, how the peer review occurs, right? And once we understand that, then it will be possible for us to uh, sail us through this peer review process. And of course, there are some ethical issues which which lie with the research publications. So let's get introduced, or let's get acquainted with these ethical issues as well, right? Okay, fine. So why do you want to have research publications? I believe that this topic has already been opened yesterday, and Dr. H.T. Jadhav sir has already introduced you to some various facets of research, right? But again, let's start from the beginning. The most fundamental question is why one should do the research publications, right? Why one is required to rather do the research publications? What's it in there for you? So which leads for you to pursue research publications. I think we can have multiple answers, right? We are not going to have a single answer to this question, right? So maybe someone of you would say that you want to obtain higher degree. For example, those of you are BTech, you want to obtain MTech or ME. Already those who are ME or MTech, you want to pursue your PhD, right? And as a part of PhD, right, you are required to uh, get the papers published, right? Maybe two at least 2 papers, right, in certain type of journals and maybe conference publications, right? And unless and until you produce those papers, unless and until you author those papers, you are not eligible for submitting your work, right? So one of the answer could typically be to obtain the higher degree. Second is publish or perish, right? So, or maybe slight difference is patent and perish, right? So I think tomorrow Kakade sir is going to deal with this another aspect, patenting. So either you publish or you patent, right? But otherwise you are going to perish, right? So that is what is the fact of today's higher education, right? So there is much emphasis. So see, try to understand that our scope is not only limited to classroom teaching. Fraternity, right? That should be communicated to the outside world, right? That should be published or that should be patented, that should come into public domain, and then it's okay, isn't it? Otherwise, you will perish. You will perish in the sense, say for example, for increments or for higher promotions, right? There are certain conditions that you need to satisfy. For example, if you want to be associate professor, I guess there is some limit of 3 to 5 research papers, right? So you need to have 3 to 5 research papers published, right? Or if you want to be professor, then you need to have some 10 research publications, right? Published in appropriate journals, right? So otherwise, of course, you are not you are not eligible to even apply, right? If you don't have those numbers with you. So the point is, if you want to grow, if you want to get promoted, if you want to get increment, right? So obviously, you need to demonstrate your capability as a researcher. And how you are going to demonstrate your capability as a researcher? You need to publish, right? Or you need to obtain patent, right? Patenting rights, right? So either of these or both of these, right? Another is communicating your research. So point is, okay, fine, you have done your research, but then if your research findings just, stay with you, right? And if they uh, do not, if you don't pass it on to the outside world, then it is not of use, right? So whatever the research that you have done, the research findings that you have made, ultimately the society should get benefited by your research, right? That is basically the motto of your research. So of course, you need to gain recognition. Nothing wrong in that, right? So you should get the recognition, but at the same time, the society also should get benefited. So on account of your research, the scientific progress should move on, right? So you need to contribute to the scientific community, and that is why you would like to communicate your research. So how do you communicate your research? So basically, when you go into the conference and when you present your paper, right, then that is nothing but communication of your research. Or when you get published, right, when you get published, then of course it is a communication, right? You have been able to communicate your research. And then inner circle, right? So ultimately, this is something that, okay, fine, you have done really well. You have got promoted, right? And you have a good word for you as a researcher. You have already demonstrated your capabilities, right? But then at the same time, when your paper gets published, right? When you go in the conference, meet people, right? Present your findings in front of them, and you get acceptance, right? Your research gets acceptance. That is a kind of enormous satisfaction you derive out of it, right? So you are very much satisfied, and that is something that cannot be compared. That is unparalleled, right? You cannot compare it with the money or the recognition that you get, right? So something very altruist, right? And you talk about when you talk about inner satisfaction. So immensely, you feel very nice about yourself that you have been able to publish your research findings, and especially this is something you experience when you get published in highly reputed journal. So if you get published in SCI journal, right, or if you get a journal which is highly ranked in the community, of course, that brings a lot of joy for you. It brings a lot of satisfaction for you, right? So, of course, one or all of these could be the motivating factors for a teacher or for a researcher to get published, right? Okay, fine. So moving forward, I think there is some background noise. So can you just take care of it? There is some background noise that is coming up.
Yes, sir.
There is someone.
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. You're not audible, sir.
Okay, now I think it's okay, na?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I will switch off my camera as well now.
Yes, sir.
And now I am audible. I will come back to my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, fine. So I think my screen is visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So, so I need to take a call on whether I want to get published in a conference or whether I want to get published in journal. Now, see, obviously, conference publication uh, won't have that kind of impact as compared to journal publication, right? So definitely the credentials of journal publication will be much more as compared to conference publications, right? So journal publication will definitely have high weightage as compared to conference publication. So conference basically is all about networking, right? It's basically a networking opportunity for you. So you are advised when you have started your research, right? And you have got some elementary research you have done, right? You have initiated your research, some preliminary findings you have done, right? It's not a complete work, right? Some part of work you have done. And then it is appropriate for you to go and participate in a conference, right? To go and present your work in front of other people, right? So that you get an understanding, you get a feedback from them that whether the direction that you are heading into, whether it is correct or not, right? You will get some good inputs from the academic community when you participate in a conference, right? So basically, conference publication is all about a piece of research, right? It may not be a very comprehensive research. While when you talk of a journal publication, when you think of a journal publication, it is supposed to be a comprehensive research finding, which means you have identified a problem, you have worked on a problem, and then you have systematically analyzed, and then you have uh, made a conclusion based on your findings, right? So it is a full work, right? It is a comprehensive work. It is an elaborate work, right? So that is the case with journal publication, right? While, say, for example, I have just modeled a system, an engineering system. I have just modeled and I have simulated, right? So that is a piece of work. I have not done any experimental findings as such, right? Experimental evaluation I have not made, right? So in that case, it will be appropriate for me to go and participate in a conference and get published over there. So of course, there are some highly reputed conferences as well. And these are the typical conferences, right? Even in these conferences, if you could publish, then it is as good as a journal publication, right? So it depends upon the conference. So obviously, if you if you participate in a conference which has been, say, for example, organized by, say, one of the IITs or IIC, right, and then definitely it's very much credible, right? Your credentials of that conference proceeding will be uh, very high, right? And definitely it would be acceptable in academic community, right? And of course, when I talk of journal publications, I mean to say reputed journals. Reputed in the sense, maybe these could be Scopus Index journals or H Index journals, right? SCI journals, right? Or at least the journals which have been mentioned, which have been accepted by the university, respective university, or in general, maybe we can say at least UGC, right? UGC, care journals, right? I don't intend to count on those predatory journals, right? So predatory journals are those journals, right, which usually we call them as paid kind of journals, paid category journals, which means you write something, you pay to the journal, maybe 6,000, 12,000, right? Depending upon maybe the journal cost, right? 4,000, 3,000 even, right? And then you get published. So just a namesake peer review. These journals conduct a namesake peer review, right? Or sometimes even there is no peer review process, and immediately they accept your publication, right? They publish whatever you have submitted to them without any peer review, right? And they even certify also that okay, you have been certified that this article of yours has been published, right? But there is a word of precaution that we shouldn't get attracted to such journals. So this is a shortcut, but then the credentials of these journals is equal to zero, right? These don't have any acceptance in academic community, and it is just could be considered as a raddi, right? So let's not think of those journals. Just let's think of those highly uh, reputed journals, right? So I will talk about what do you mean by H-index journal, what do you mean by impact factor, right? All those things also I'm going to talk about, right? So what kind of paper you can write or what kind of contributions you can make, right? There are of course variety of research articles, variety of contributions that you can make. There is something called as letters or short communications, right? And these are intended for quick and early communication of significant or original advances without including too much data or detail. For example, uh, in 2020, isn't it? COVID just emerged, right? From China, it emerged, right? And in a very short time, it just spread in the world. So COVID was certainly a new thing, right? So you might have experienced or you might have noticed that there were many papers, right, got published in that period, right? During that first quarter of 2020, right? And these were all dedicated to COVID. More importantly, these were not very lengthy papers. These are very short papers, maybe of 1 or 2 pages only, right? And whatever the preliminary findings, whatever the preliminary experimentation that the people have done, of course these were belonging to medical fraternity, right? But because this was a very new thing, right? So it's very important that whenever something new you find, you come across, then you would like to bring it to the notice of the world, bring it to the notice of the research community, right? So it could not be a big work as such, an extensive work, elaborate work, comprehensive work, right? Right? It could be simply a piece of work, right? But you prefer to send it to a journal, right? So I have seen some articles published on COVID, and these were published by very highly reputed journals like uh, Springer or Elsevier publishers, right? So they published these articles, and these were very small, 2 to 3 page articles, right? But the important aspect of these publications was novelty, right? They were addressing a very new phenomena, a very new thing, right? And that was the COVID. So the world was, following COVID, and that's why those publications or whatever that you find as far as the COVID was concerned, right? So it was easy for publication, right? So this is what we mean by letters or short communications. So that's why it has been said that they may not have too much of data or details. Other categories: review papers. Review papers summarize recent developments on a specific topic without introducing new data. So what you do is you don't contribute as such, but you refer to some earlier publications, earlier contributions in a particular area. You study them, you analyze those findings, the data that has already been presented, and then you present it, or based on this data, you come with your own understanding. You develop an understanding, right? And you conclude based on the earlier contributions. So as such, you have not introduced any new finding, right? You haven't introduced any new data, right? But still, the review papers we may get published, right? Or there are certain, sometimes there is a specific call from journal editors, and in that during that call they seek review papers, right? So it is not a bad idea really to start your research journey with a review paper, because when you begin a research, your research, and I think yesterday the resource person must have talked about literature review, right? So whatever the literature review, extensive literature review you do, right, you can present in a appropriate form, and based on your review you can write a paper and you can consider it for publication, right? Then there is something called as full article, right? Full article contain significant data, detailed developments and outcomes. So it is a research article, right? Full research article wherein you have come up with your own research findings, right? So you have identified a problem, you have applied a methodology, and then you have come up with your own results, right? So the full articles would be the best way to get published, right? And this is where you are contributing, right? So full articles are those articles where your contributions comes to the fore. For example, in case of review papers, you may not have contributed, right? But in case of full articles, the major requirement is that your own contribution, right? Then research elements enable you to publish research output such as data, software, methods, videos, and much more in brief, citable articles. Right. So there are some, apart from your main research, there could be some ample amount of data, right? Or there could be some software as a part of your research you might have developed, right? Or you might have developed a new method, right? So this is also something sometimes you would like to get published, right? And these are called as research elements, right? So there are multiple ways to make a contribution, right? So you need to figure out what kind of contribution you want to make, right? Okay, of course, we will have question answers at later stage, right? Now let me move ahead with this content. You may note down your questions, right? And then towards the end, we will have the question answer session, right? Okay, but then the next question is, how do I find the right journal, right? So I have written a paper, but then there are thousands of journals, right? And there are hundreds of reputed good quality journals. So how do I arrive at this decision, right? How do I find an appropriate journal for my content? And this is where some online tools will help you. And these are the tools, those have been uh, those have been prepared for you by the publisher. So for example, here Elsevier has come up with their own finder, journal finder, right? So there is this journalfinder.elsevier.com, right? And when you click upon it, then you need to just copy paste, say for example, the title, then the keywords, abstract, right, in appropriate places. And then when you hit that find button, then the tool itself searches the database of journals and suggests, it comes with suggestions of variety of journals that would fit suitable for your content, right? And of course it gives you strength of match as well, right? For example, 100% uh, means the particular journal which has been suggested by the finder, right, it is very much suitable for your content, right? There is 100% of fit, and then there is some 90% of fit, 85% of fit, right? So in the decreasing order, it would list some maybe 10, 15, 20 journals, right? And those journals which have got the highest amount of fit, they will appear at the top. So out of hundreds of journals, right? You may concentrate on few journals, maybe some 15, 20 or 20, 30 odd journals, right? So it narrows your search, right? And this is how it helps you. Similar, of course, similarly, there is a tool offered by Springer, there is a tool offered by Wiley, right? All those publishers have come up with their own journal finder tools, right? So which you can use. And of course, there is this journal guide, www.journalguide.com, right? So this will also help you. This website is also help you to find appropriate journal for your content, right? But basically, it depends upon your aim and scope, right? So every journal would have mentioned their aim and scope, right? And most of the times, what happens is, whenever you submit a manuscript and the journal rejects it, most of the time it has nothing got to do with your quality of your work, right? Most of the times it has got to do with the scope, right? So sometimes what happens is you feel that your content fits within the scope of journal, but if you read it carefully, right, there is something else that the editor or the editorial board is seeking, and your paper is not fitting within the scope of the journal, and that is why the editor may not entertain your manuscript, right? And then you will get a rejection, right? So the first and foremost thing that you need to ensure is that whatever you are going to submit, right, and to the journal, right, so you should read the scope of the journal, try to understand the scope of the journal, and then make a call whether whatever you have done, right, your area of research, whether it fits into the scope of the journal or not. If it fits into the scope of journal, then of course the editor board will be interested and they will forward your paper for peer review process, right? So the first important thing is the acceptance of an editor based on the scope of the journal, right? Then accepted types of articles. So what you can do is already those articles which have been published, you would be able to find, you would be able to access those articles, right? So you can go through those articles so that you get an idea about what kind of articles a typical journal is accepting, a typical journal is entertaining, right? So this is something what you can do. You can just go through earlier accepted articles so that you get a feel of the scope and the uh, type kind of articles interested uh, by the journal, right? Readership. So what is the readership for that particular journal, right? That also is something you need to understand, right? Whether the journal has considered general readership, or there is a very specific highly domain specific readership that the journal is entertaining. For example, my area is, say for example, smart materials, right? But then again, smart material is a very wide area, and then there are multiple technologies that are existing, right? So for example, if I want to work in magnetorheological, right, MR, so just for sake of example, I am considering this because I have worked in that area, right? So there are some journals which are totally dedicated to this kind of category called as, say, smart materials, right? Dedicated to intelligent or smart materials, right? So, so then the readership is very specific, right? Highly domain specific, right? And sometimes the readership could be very wide. For example, Journal of Mechanical Engineering, right? So it is very wide in scope, right? So whatever comes under the group of mechanical engineering, right, or under the civil engineering, for example, if I say Journal of Civil Engineering, right, then everything could be considered, right? So it has got a broad readership, right? So you need to pay attention to what kind of readership the journal is eliciting, right? The current hot topics by going through the abstracts of recent publications, right? So as I given examples at that time, some 2 years back, or even still now, isn't it? COVID is a hot topic for those journals which are dealing with, say, for example, biotech and health aspects, right? So there are some typical technologies or typical topics, right? And if you have worked on those topics, if you have worked on those areas, then of course your acceptance from that journal, then there is a chance that your article will be accepted, right? So you need to take these issues under consideration when you try to find out appropriate journal for your content, right? So I hope that you have got an idea about how do you find an appropriate journal for your publication. Then finding the right journal, uh, yeah, so there are some metrics, right? So every journal has got certain metrics that also you are supposed to study. For example, all the SVR journals, they mention the typical speed, right? The speed for publication, right? So they would have mentioned the review speed and online publication time. For example, typically you will find that this typical journal takes around 8 weeks for the peer review process, or 12 weeks for the paper publication, right? So you get an idea by and large. right? On an average basis, say particular this XYZ journal takes around say 12 weeks, right? Or 16 weeks, right? So the journal particularly would have provided such kind of metrics, and as an author you are interested how long, how much time it takes so as to process your paper, right? So obviously if you want to compare two journals, right, one journal is taking say around 1 year, right, some 12 months, and another journal is claiming to take around 3 to 4 months, obviously you prefer the second journal, right, wherein the time for processing is less, right? But of course there are some other aspects as well that also you need to take into account. One of the aspect is reach, geographic location of corresponding authors and journal usage. So there are some national journals, there are some international journals, there are some journals which are limited to a typical continent, right? So depending upon your work, depending upon the reach of your work, isn't it, depending upon the reach of journal, you will have to make an appropriate decision. Another important thing is impact, and there is something called as impact factor of a journal, right? So impact metrics based on citations received by article. So say typically ACI journals have got their impact factor, right? And impact factor has to be provided by Thomson Reuters, right? So unfortunately now what has happened is those predatory journals, they have also started, claiming the impact factor for their journals, right? And in their case, the impact factors are of very high order. Say, for example, 6 point something, 12 point something, 8 point something, right? Where in actual practice, highly reputed journals would struggle with even impact factor of 1 or 2, right? So very good journals sometimes they may have an impact factor of say 0.6, 0.7 of that order, right? Or even 1 point something, 2 point something, and that also would be a very good impact factor, right? But these journals, they claim that their impact factor is of the order of 12, 14, 6, 8, right? And which is very ridiculous. So try to understand this fact. The impact factor, whenever you come across impact factor of the journal, you need to ensure that whether it is an SCI journal and whether it's Thomson Reuters impact factor that has been claimed by the journal, right? So average number of times. So what is impact factor basically? Impact factor is average number of times published papers are cited up to 2 years after publication. What does this mean? Let's go through an illustration, right? Say for example, A stands for the number of times articles published in 2017 and 2018 were cited in index journals during 2019, right? So you consider a time period of 2 years, right? So right now if we are in 2022, then we'll consider those publications which have got published in 2021 and 2020, right? And then we'll see how many of them, right, the number of times they have got cited or published in current year, right? For example, here B is what? The number of articles published in 2017 and 18. So total number of articles published in 17, 18, and out of these numbers, the A is what? Number of times articles published in 17, 18 were cited in index journals. So the journal might have published 100 articles, right? 100 articles in last 2 years, but out of 100 articles, how many articles, how many times the articles have been cited, right? That is what needs to be considered, right? So the impact factor for 2019, the current year, say for example, is A upon B, right? So the ratio of A and B will give me impact factor. So the timeline, typically the timeline that has been taken is 2 years, right? So obviously for 2022, right now we are in 2022, right? The papers which have got published in 2021 and 2020 will be considered, right? There is another important metric called as H index, right? So sometimes you compare the journals based on H index, sometimes you compare it on the basis of impact factor, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that highly H index journal is very good as compared to lowly H index journal, right? It may not sometimes be true, right? But then yes, it serves as a benchmark, it serves as a reference, right? So a journal has an H index of H if there is at least H papers published in that journal that have received at least H citations each, right? So for example, here highly reputed journal has been mentioned here, right? This is published by Elsevier. The name of the journal is Applied Thermal Engineering, right? And its H index few years back was 94. Of course, currently it is more than 100. In fact, more than I guess 120 or 130, right? But say for example, what it means is this particular journal, right? So there are at least 94 papers published in this journal which have been cited 94 times, right? There are 94 articles, right, which have been cited 94 times, right? So citation means you provide a reference, right? You cite them, you cite up someone's work, you cite someone's paper, means what? You acknowledge, right, the particular contribution, right? And you put its reference while writing your own work, right? So this small plot also will give you some insight. So on x-axis is papers, on y-axis is citations, right? So here citations is equal to papers and that is equal to H, right? So first H papers have got how many citations? H citations. So there are H papers which have got H number of citations and that is going to be your H index, right? So with the help of this example, I think we have made it clear that there are 94 papers, the 94 articles published in this journal which have been cited 94 times, which have got 94 citations. So I guess that this point is clear to you, impact factor and H index. Now let's move forward. So there are typically two types of journals, right? There is something called as green open access and gold open access, right? So point is, now these open access journals will charge you, right? Open access journals will charge you, but these are not predatory journals. So the bottom line is that it's not the case that all paid journals are predatory journals. All paid journals are bad quality journals. That is not true, right? So there is something called as green open access and there is something called as gold open access, and this distinction is made based on the access and fee, right? So for green open access, there is no fee payable by the author, right? And all the costs will be covered by the subscriptions. While in case of gold open access journals, the fee is going to be paid by the author, right? Or on their behalf by the funding body. So green open access, you are not required to pay as an author, while in case of gold open access, as an author, you need to pay a certain fee, processing fee to the journal, right? And then as far as green open access is concerned, right, the free public access to a version of your article, and there may be some time delay called as embargo period, right? While that is not the case with gold open access. The beauty of gold open access is what? It is immediately free to public, right? So any public can access, anyone can access your paper, right? So access is immediate and permanent. So then the next question that comes to your mind is, then why one should go for open access journal? And the open access journal, the reason to go for open access journal sometimes is to ensure that your research work gets penetration, right? It reaches out to the masses in a least possible time, right? And as a researcher, why you want to do is because you want to increase the number of citations to your articles, right? So the larger masses it reaches to, right, there are high chances that your paper, your article will get citations as well, right? And sometimes basically it is the funding body's requirement, right? So for example, your research has been funded, so they will put a condition. They will put a condition during the signing of agreement that whatever the publications that emerge out based on the research that has been funded by the funding agency, that has to be published in a open access journal, right? And they allow you to use some amount of the funding for this purpose, right? For the paying the uh, processing fee, right? The open access fee, right? Why? Because the funding agency also wants to have recognition, right? They also need some recognition, right? And what do you mean by embargo period? In case of green open access, you are saying that there is a time delay that may apply. There is a what is called as embargo period. So what it means is typically when your article gets published, right? It is not going to have open access category, right? Which means it is not going to be available freely to everyone, right? So those libraries which have subscribed to the journal, right? Only those libraries or those who have subscribed to these libraries, they can have only access to your article, right? Not for all, right? Why? Because the journal is making business. They are earning based on the library subscriptions, right? So the libraries, so IITs, NITs, right? So they have their libraries, and these libraries have subscribed to these journals, right? So they will have to pay some fees to those publishers if they want to access their journals, right? So on this model, some journals work, while in some cases, the author will have to pay the fees, and the benefit that the author gets is the paper, the article, research article is accessible free of cost, right? It could be accessed by anyone in any part of world, right? That is a benefit that the researcher is going to get. So typical embargo period means what? Sometimes what happens is the journal after say 24 months or 36 months, which means after 2 to 3 years, then the journal may bring your journal under this free category, right? So typically Elsevier journals, few of the Elsevier journals, they have this embargo period of 24 months or 36 months. What it means is after 24 months, that is 2 years, or after 36 months, that is 3 years, your article would be brought in open access, which means anyone wants to have access to this journal, your article, right? They can have access. They can have access free of cost, right? But after 2 years or 3 years, as is the case with that particular journal, right? So this period is what is called as embargo period. So before embargo period, if you want to access that journal, if you want to access the article published in that journal, you will have to pay. You will have to pay to the journal. You will have to buy that article, right? But after embargo period, it would be accessible freely. I hope that you have got this distinction. I hope that you have got this difference, right, between green open access and gold or open access. And there are certain journals which are hybrid journals, right? Hybrid means they work in both modes. That is, they use both modes, and they give option to you. So you as author, you have option to choose either green open access or gold open access. So these are called as hybrid journals, right? So that is another way out there as far as publishing is concerned. Okay, fine. I think you have got the point. Let's move forward. Guide for authors, right? Now, when you search a journal, right? So there is a guide for authors, right? The journal on their website. So they have put this kind of author guidelines or guide for authors tab provided for the sake of authors. So here you has taken a screenshot on Elsevier, right? So you can find the guide for authors on the journal's homepage on elsevier.com, right? And it's not only of as an example I have taken Elsevier, right? But then for Springer, for Wiley, for all those ASME, right? Or ASC, right? All those websites, they have also come up with their guide for authors, right? So this is where you need to get into, right? So there is a guide for authors, and there are some ethical guidelines. There are some submission guidelines. Those have been made available, right? So as an author, it is better if you read them out and try to understand those guidelines, right? But it is there. The point is, it is there already available on the website, right? So as far as your article is concerned, your manuscript is concerned, there is a typical article structure, right, that you need to follow. For example, of course, there would be, this is the most simple version that we can have, like you are going to have a title of your article first, then that will be followed by an abstract, and then you will mention few keywords, right? And then there is this what is called as IMRAD format, right? IMRAD stands for introduction, methods, results, and discussions, right? So in this sequence, the the organization of your manuscript is expected, right? So make your article as concise as possible. Very important thing is, because the publisher wants to accommodate not only your article but other articles as well, right? So you need to be very concise, right? So if you can write whatever it takes, typically 10 pages, right? If you can make it concise, and if you can bring it within 8 pages, I think that will add value for the publisher, right? So very important thing not to be missed is, you need to be crisp, you need to be very concise, right? And then the last session is about conclusion. So you mention conclusion, right? Conclusion of your research, and then you acknowledge your maybe funding agency or those people who have contributed to your research, right? References and supplementary data, right? So this is a typical article structure that you would like to follow in most of the cases, right? So let's go into all those details. I think few of those aspects might have been touched in the earlier session as well, right? So title typically has to be, it should clearly describe the content. So by reading title itself, your reader should get an idea what kind of article is this about, right? Or on which topic this article has been focused. So your title has to be, it should give a reflection of the work. Authors, ensure recognition for the writers, right? So the author name should appear there, then their affiliation, right? Affiliation, and then the order of authors is also important. I will touch upon this aspect as well in due course of time. Abstract, then you describe what was done. So abstract means summary. You summarize your article, right, within say 150 or 250 words, whatever is the word limit that has been assigned by the journal. Then there would be some keywords for most of the journals. Now the keywords will be there. The keywords are very important for abstracting and indexing services. So based on the keywords, your article is going to be abstracted and indexed. So that's why the keywords are very important for you as well as the readers. Introduction, you explain the problem, right? Then so you introduce your problem here in the introduction session. Methods means methodology. So you explain the methodology, the method that you have applied, the data that you have collected, right? Results and discussion, wherein you describe what has been discovered, and then you also discuss the findings, the implications, the effect that it may cause, right? So results and discussions, only you are not required to produce the results, you are required to discuss your results as well in the context given, right? Then you acknowledge, you make an acknowledgement. So you ensure that those who have helped in the research, they get some recognition, right? Then finally you come up with your references. So ensures previously published work is recognized. And then if required, maybe you can have your appendices or at least appendix, right? In some journals it is okay to come up with appendices or appendix, right? Which provides some supplemental data for the expert reader. So this is the data that may not, it may not be appropriate to put it within the main body, right? It's not appropriate to put within main body. It is something, on and above, right? So that you would like to include as a part of appendix, right? So these are typical elements of a paper, typical paper, right? Fine. Now let's go into the details, right? All these elements. Let's go into the details of all those elements. So typically, so essentially, effective title: identify the article's main issue, begin with the article's subject matter. You need to be accurate, unambiguous, and specific whenever possible. It shouldn't be. It should be as short as possible. You are not supposed to have a very lengthy title which runs few lines, some 3, 4, 5 lines, right? It should be as much short as possible, and it should be enticing and interesting, right? So it should kind of make. It should be appealing. It should be appealing for the reader, right? Just looking at the title, the reader should attracted to your paper, your article, right? So he should feel that okay, there is something for me, right? So they make people want to read further, right? So these are some guidelines for the title of your article. So you need to be careful about the title also, right? Your title needs to be specific, it should be precise, right? So that it should convey the scope of your work, right? But at the same time it should be catchy, right? So that your reader gets attracted to your title, right? So these are some important guidelines as far as framing the title of your article, right? The next important issue is authorship. Now this is very important aspect, right? Whom you should attribute as an author, right? So as per this British Medical Journal, right, there are some guidelines on authorship which we'll go through. So what it tells you is there are 3 points A, B, and C, and either of these will merit the authorship. Conception or design or analysis and interpretation of data or both. So either you should have, you should be merited with conception or design or analysis and interpretation of data or both, right? Or point B, drafting the article or revising it for critically important intellectual content, right? So your contribution could be in the form of the drafting, right? You have helped drafting the article, and very importantly is that you have been responsible for critical evaluation intellectually, right? So you have given some intellectual inputs, right? That is very important. Or point C, final approval of the version to be published, right? Final approval of version to be published. Participation, just a minute, let's use pointer here. Yeah, so this is what I'm referring. Final approval of the version to be published, and participation solely in the collection of data doesn't justify authorship. So someone just has collected data, right? Someone has just collected the data, and then he or she will not be uh, justified as an author, right? All elements of an article A, B, C above, right, critical to its main conclusions must be attributable to at least one author. What it means is the at least there should be one author who should be responsible for all of these A, B, and C, right? And then other authors. So the next question is how many authors you are going to have, right? So with regard to authorship, there could be some questions like how many authors could be there for an article, and it's difficult to answer, right? You can have a single authored paper, or you can have as many as 20, 25 authors, even more than that as well, right? So it depends upon your research work. It depends upon your research project. So there are some very huge research projects, right? And even many so it could be a collaborative research projects, right? and there are some 3-4 countries, right? And the research scientists of all those 3-4 countries would have been contributing their part into the research, right? For example, the research on COVID, right? And that is not limited to a single person or a single entity as such, right? So, for example, the vaccinations that we have got, isn't it? So it has been the joint, it has been come through a collaborative effort of AstraZeneca, a company, a private company, and Oxford University, right? The Covishield I'm talking about, right? So of course you are going to have multiple authors many of the times, but sometimes if a single person has led the research project and he has been solely responsible for it, right? Sometimes it could be a single author contribution as well. But in most of the cases, we see that there are multiple authors who are going to take credit for the authorship of an article, right? So it depends upon how many people have really intellectually contributed to the article, right? And contribution, when we say contribution, it should either be A or B or C, at least either of these, right? So there should be main author who should be responsible for all of these A, B, and C, right? At least there should be one author who should be responsible for A, B, C, but at least the other authors should have contributed in either of these aspects, either A or B or C, right? So in simple words, what we can say is those people who have contributed, intellectually contributed to the cause, they may solicit the authorship, right? Who should be the first author? Now that is again a debatable question, right? Debatable in the sense there could be some controversies, right? So someone who has led the research project, someone whose contribution is of high order, right? Very value added contribution. So this person should be the first author, right? Logically, he or she should be the first author. So first author is supposed to be someone who has contributed maximal, right? And then in the decreasing order the contributions are there. So as compared to first author, contribution of second author would be less, as compared to first two authors, contribution of third author would be further less, and so on, right? So that is how this is the norm. Or in some cases there is a norm that typically in the academic context a guide will have his students as a first authors, right? Maybe one or two students, and finally his name will appear, right? Though he would have guided the uh, research, right? Ghost authorship. Ghost authorship means what? So sometimes what you come across is the research work has carried by some 2-3 people, but then there appears name of 4-5 people, right? So who are those one or two extra people? So these are the ghosts. Ghosts in the sense, even though they have not contributed anything to the research project, the research work, still their name appears as a author, right? So maybe you are subordinate, and because of some fear factor, right? You are required to add your boss name, right? Your superior's name, right? As an author, that may be the case, right? Even though his or her contribution is nil, right? So that is what is ghost authorship, right? Corresponding author. Who is going to be the corresponding author? Corresponding author is the one who is in correspondence with the publisher, right? So at publisher side, he is supposed to be the responsible for the correspondence, right? So sometimes your main author could be first author, could be corresponding author. Sometimes it may not be the case, right? So sometimes your maybe second, third, fourth author also could be a corresponding author. So typically a senior person, a senior professor, right, usually takes responsibility of the correspondence, because this is very important, right? The communication between the authors and the publisher is very important, right? And you shouldn't miss a single piece of communication, right? Otherwise there is a chance that your article may get retracted, right? So the role of corresponding author is very important, right? So then affiliation of the author. Affiliation of the author means which university or which institute, the name of institute or university should appear along with the author, right? So here again there could be some controversies, right? For example, sometimes what happens is you have done the research in earlier institute, and then you have changed your institute, you have changed your job, right? So you have entered into a new institute, and then you have, if you have published the paper, right, you have written the paper and you have got it published. But then what is important is you should have mentioned the name of the earlier institute, right? Because the research work you have done when you are part of that institution, you have used the resources of that institution, right? So that is why the affiliation is a very, important aspect for the institute or universities, right? And of course it is going to have effect on rankings, right? Rankings of university or an institute. So that is why also the affiliation becomes very important for the institute or author. For example, if you have used the institute's resources and you have mentioned affiliation of some other institute or university, then obviously it is not ethical as well, right? Title and designation of author. So basically you don't put your title and designation. For example, you are not going to write your name as Dr. Satyajit Patil, right? So doctor is a title, right? And you are not going to write your designation like, say, for example, professor in so and so department, right? Or director, dean, head of department, right? That is not supposed to be the case. So here you are writing in the capacity of author, right? So you should simply mention your name, right? Satyajit Patil or Satyajit R Patil, right? And that is sufficient. So whether or not you are PhD, whether you are professor or director, whether you are head of department, whether you are associate professor, senior professor, right? It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter, right? So title and designations should not be, incorporated when you make a communication, right? Or maybe during that paper writing process, probably you will require to feed the data, but when it gets published, then of course you will find that only your name appears, name and affiliation, right? But your designation and title doesn't appear, right? So I guess that all these points I have made clear with regard to authorship, right? Let's move forward. So abstract is very important part, which appears right there in the beginning of your research article. But very important thing to notice is that this part is to be written at the end of paper writing. So what you do is you don't write the summary in the abstract first, you write the whole paper and then you read it and then you prepare its abstract, right? So abstract is something, though it appears right there in the beginning, this is the piece that you write towards end, right? So the problem, so what you want to incorporate in the abstract, you want to make a mention of problem, the method, the results, the conclusions, so that the reader can decide whether or not to read the whole article, right? So basically by reading the abstract, your abstract, the reader should get an idea whether this piece of article, whether this article is useful to him or her, whether it is useful or not useful, right? So if he finds it useful, then it makes sense for the reader to go into the remaining part of your paper. Otherwise, he will go to the next paper, right? So abstract is very important part, and when you submit, the editor is not going to read your each and every line of your paper, right? The editor will take a look at the title, right? Title of your research paper, and then he will get into the abstract, and then based on the abstract, he will decide, he will take a call on whether to submit your paper, send it to the associate editor for further processing so that the peer review process can begin, or it is to be DES rejection. It is the case of DES rejection, right? So this is just an abstract, right? Illustration of an abstract of one of my paper that I had submitted to Journal of Brazilian Society of Mechanical Sciences and Engineering. So this is an SCI journal, right? And I had got published my paper published in 2018. So you see here there are the various parts which I have shown with the help of these underlines, right? So blue is a color that I have used for first around 3 lines, and then it changes to a different color, right? Next 4 5 lines. So these are sections, right? So what I'm trying to demonstrate is there are different sections in the abstract, right? So first 2 to 3 lines you introduce your problem, then in the middle part you talk about the methodology, right? What kind of methodology you have adopted, right? And then towards the end, you you would like to make a mention of the amount of the kind of result that you have come up with, right? And its importance, the importance of your result, right? So sometimes you can have paragraphs within the abstract. Sometimes you are going to write it as has been shown here. But most of the cases, the journal would have some word limits, and you need to adhere to those word limits, right? Maybe sometimes 150 words or 250 words, right? And so on. So of course, journal to journal, it will change. It will depend. Keywords, as I have said, these are important for abstracting and indexing services. So for visibility of your article, it's very important that you choose appropriate keywords, right? Because based on the keywords, your paper, your article will gain visibility, and then the chances will grow that your article will receive citations, right? So very important aspect from that point of view is keywords. If you want that your article should be visible, right? It should get high number of citations, then you need to really work hard on keywords. Typically, the journal will allow to have 5 or 10 keywords, right? So you may have some 4, 5, 6 keywords, right? So again, there would be upper limit, lower limit, and upper limit for number of keywords. Typically, it would be 4 to 10, right? Introduction and literature review. So this is very important part of your research paper, wherein you clearly state the problem being investigated. So you need to open up your problem here, then background that explains the problem and reasons for conducting the research. So the context of the problem, that also has to be described, right? And then very important thing is why you are investigating this problem, right? What is your motivation? That also should be clear in this section, the introduction and literature review, right? So very important aspect of this part is you need to mention novelty of your work. Novelty means in what way your work is different as compared to earlier published work, right? And this is absolutely the unique selling point, selling proposition, use USP of your paper. In especially in highly ranked journals, top journals, right? They put a lot of value on novelty, right? So if you work on something which already has been established, right, and again you publish the same thing, right, then it is not acceptable unless and until you add some kind of novelty into your paper. Identify the questions you are answering, right? So you need to identify the questions that you are answering. Explain what other findings, if any, you are challenging or extending. Briefly describe the experiment, hypothesis, research questions, general experimental design or method. Hope that I'm audible. Whether I am there with you, can someone of you
Yes, sir.
just,
Yes, sir.
yeah, okay,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You are audible, sir.
Okay, okay. So I will go ahead. So very important, another important thing is you need to make a mention of literature gap, right? So sometimes these could be a different sections. Introduction could be a different section. Literature review could be a different section. But as far as I'm concerned, mostly I combine these two sections, introduction and literature review. And the literature gap is something that you need to bring forth. Right? So you need to make a mention of literature gap, right? In literature gap means the novelty, right? So you are trying to tell your audience, right, or the editor or the reviewer, right, what is something that is different in your paper, right, as compared to earlier published papers. The earlier published papers say I'm going to have multiple papers on MR breaks, right, the topic of my research. But unless and until I provide a new thread, a new dimension to this research, MR break, right? There is no chance that my paper will be considered by the editor, right? And this is something that you claim, you bring it forth in the form of novelty, right? So you introduce, you show them some literature gaps, right? There are some areas which have not been yet explored, and then you claim that this is what is going to be your contribution. You have made an effort to explore that area, and that is why it is novel, it is a new, right? Because ultimate aim of research is to increase the knowledge quotient, right? To contribute in the area of, in that particular area, right? Intellectual contribution. So unless and until you ensure you make it a point to bring it to the notice of the editors and reviewer that there is something new in your paper is not going to be considered, right? So this is very important part of introduction and literature review. So most of the time your associate editor will go through this part, introduction and literature review, right? And then if you could convince him, then only it will go to the next stage, that is it will be handed over to peer reviewers so that they can read and review your paper, right? But here itself, if your paper is weak, introduction and literature review, then ultimately again it becomes a case of desk rejection. Then your associate editor or editor will get back to you and convey that your paper is not acceptable, right? You may try it somewhere else. So this is just an again illustration that I have tried to bring to your fore, introduction and literature review, and here those lines which I have highlighted, right? So however, works on the reliability aspect of MRBs have not been evidenced in literature except for the work of Patil and Sawant. So what I'm trying to say here is, in what way our work is unique, novel, except only this work, and again this was our work, right? So we don't find that the reliability aspect of MR break has been explored, right? And that is why we claim that it is a unique work, it is a very novel work, right? So sometimes it may take only a 1 or 2 sentence, sometimes maybe it will take one paragraph, right? A small paragraph of 5 or 6 lines, but very important that you should, bring to the fore the literature gap, right? You should make them visible, right? That is your job. This is the second aspect, right? Second example. So here I say that in one of my paper, which had been published in Applied Thermal Engineering in 2016. So what I say, this issue has been addressed, neither this issue has been addressed, but neither detailed methodology of the thermal analysis nor simulation based on the real world cycle have been presented. So what I mean to say here is, though earlier there has some research in the particular area on MR break, as an author, our claim is that we haven't seen that there is some detailed methodology of the thermal analysis of MR break that has been carried out earlier, or no one has yet has done simulation based on real world drive cycle, right? So this is what was our claim, and this claim was accepted, right? So it is your job to claim the novelty, right? To claim the novelty by showing the literature gap, right? Unless and until you do that, your paper will not be able to move forward, right? Because ultimately there is no point in reinventing the same wheel, right? So already something has been researched, something has been established as a fact, and again you do research on the same thing and again come with the same set of findings, right? So there is no meaning, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? And that is why there is a lot of emphasis on literature gap and novelty aspect, right? Then methods means methodology. So here you you should write in a such way that the reader, if any reader wants to replicate your research, then he should be able to repeat it. Replicate means replication of your research means repeat. So if in his her own lab, if someone wants to repeat your experiments, right, then he or she should be able to do that, right? So in that detailed way, you should have written the article. That is what is the point. Explain how you have studied the problem, identify the procedures you have followed, and order this chronologically, right? Then if you have used the new methodology, then you'll have to make a mention of it, right? You need to mention about the equipments and materials that you have used for experimentation, the frequency of observations, how many readings you have taken, right? At what point of time, right? And you need to make a mention of whether there have been some error of measurements or if there are some limitations of research design, right? So all those things are, so you need to consider and make a mention of, right? So this is what is about methods. I think we need to increase the pace. It is 11:30 a.m. as per my watch, but still we have to complete some content. We'll have to go through some content. Then results. So present your results objectively. You are required to show some new results, right? Already established facts, as I have shown, right? There is no point in again coming up with the same things, right? You need to follow logical sequence based on tables and figures, and you are not required to, you are not expected to speculate or over discuss results, right? So what does that mean, right? So I think I will skip this and I will come to this part. For example, discussion and conclusions, right? So here you have said your results directly support the conclusion, but very important thing is that you need to use specific expressions. For example, instead of saying a higher temperature, better you say 12 degrees higher, right? Or you say you only discuss what you define in earlier paper, right? Don't introduce the reader to a whole new vocabulary. So new vocabulary should not now be introduced in this section. All the interpretations and speculations are based on the fact, not imagination. There is no scope for any emotional appeal, right? There is no scope for your imagination, right? Whatever is the fact based, whatever you have proven, whatever you have been able to present, right? Based on those interpretations, based on the data, you have to draw the conclusions and make a mention of it, right? Those slides which I have skipped, so there are some guidelines for tables and figures, right? So I think looking at the time constraint, I will skip them and I will move ahead. This is just an illustration of discussion and conclusion, right? So that was what my point I was saying, that isn't it? So here you see the underlined word, the underlined sentence. I'm saying it reduces stopping distance by 11% and stopping time by 15.68%. So I'm very specific, right? I'm not just saying that the stopping distance has been decreased. What I'm saying that the stopping distance has been reduced by how much? 11%, and stopping time has been reduced by 15.68%. And that is why that has been possible because of our methodology, what we have done. That is what is our contribution, right? So these are some finer aspects, important aspects that one needs to be aware of, right? Okay, then of course there is an acknowledgement section. So whom you are going to acknowledge? You are going to acknowledge those people, right, who have helped you, but whose help or whose contribution is not an intellectual contribution as such, right? So people who have contributed to the paper, but not by a sufficient amount to be included in the author list, should be thanked in the acknowledgements, right? So these are the people. For example, you know, some people might have given some inputs. They may have guided you, right? So those are the people, or maybe your funding agency. Very important thing is your funding agency, right? Or the laboratory which have made the resources accessible for you, right? So these are the people or institutes, right? The funding agencies you should be able to, you are required to acknowledge in this section, acknowledgement. Then of course there will be references in citations. So there are two ways going about it. One is Vancouver style and second is Harvard style. So this is Vancouver style, wherein you put this square bracket and it comes with a name, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And the similar sequence you will find in reference section. While this method where you use parenthesis, you write the last name of the author, comma, and then year of publication of the article, right? This is Harvard method. So you need to see which of the method has been advocated by the journal. Sometimes the journal insists on Vancouver, sometimes it insists on Harvard, sometimes there is some other styling that the journal might have chosen, right? So you need to just see what kind of styling the journal has preferred with regard to referencing and citations, right? But these are very important. References, number of references are very important. right? So with one or two references, you are not going to publish the paper. Typically, you need to have at least 15-20 good references. And again, the thumb rule is that out of 15 to 20, right, at least your 30% of references should belong to journal publication. Remaining maybe 20-30% you can attribute to conferences, but it should not be vice versa, right? Vice versa means 70-80% of your references belong to conference and 20% 30% only belong to journal. Probably in some cases it may not be acceptable, right? You need to be aware of this. How many recent references? Very important thing to concentrate upon is you should use recent references. Recent means within last 3 to 5 years. So right now we are 2022. So if someone is using a reference in 1990, 1995, I think it would not be appropriate unless and until it is a very kind of classical work, right? If it is a classical work, then only it is justifiable. Otherwise, you should use references within last some 3 to 5 years, maximum 10 years, right? Not beyond that. Your language quality is very important. So you are advised to take help of someone who is proficient in English, right? Maybe faculty or English communicator, right? Because we are not natives, right? We are not native speaker of English. So, but this is very important aspect. And the common errors could be sentence construction, incorrect use of incorrect tenses, use of incorrect grammar, and then mixing of languages, right? So there is nothing wrong if you take a help of a person who is proficient in English, right, for making those language corrections, right? There are some ethical issues that you need to be aware of. For example, there is going to be authorship dispute. I think we have talked about it. There is going to be conflict of interest. For example, you happen to be peer reviewer, right? And then you know your friend, and your friend's paper comes to you as a peer reviewer, right? And then this is a conflict of interest, right? So, or maybe you are you have applied for a funding, and then you happen to be one of the member of the selection of that funding agency, right? The one of the member of the panel which the funding agency has constituted to evaluate the applications, right? And you yourself is the applicant, one of the applicants. So that is what is called as conflict of interest. Plagiarism, it is a crime, right? In the research world, it is a crime, right? So you should take care of this plagiarism. Simultaneous submissions means you have submitted to more than one journal, the same piece of paper you have submitted to more than one journal, and this is something unethical. So unless and until you get rejected, your paper rejected, you are not expected to submit your work to another journal, right? Research fraud, right? You are not supposed to falsify the data. You are not supposed to manipulate the research data, tables and images. So whatever the reading, whatever the observation that you make, that you need to record, right? Not what you desire. Salami slicing, right? So salami slicing means what you do is one meaningful paper you break into some 2, 3, 4 pieces, right? And you get published them, right? So this is salami slicing. So these are some ethical issues that one needs to be careful about. Plagiarism, I think all of you may be aware of, right? So you are stealing someone else's ideas and then you are projecting it as your own idea, right? So there is what is called as similarity index, right? So with the help of these softwares, Turnitin, I think it, right? So at RIT we are using Turnitin software, right? There are many softwares, right, with the help of which you can check similarity index. So typically when you submit your paper, the first thing what the journal office do is they do this plagiarism check, right? And if they find that the similarity index is very high, so, right, say maybe typical constraint is 10 or 20%, up to 10-20% they allow. But if they find it more than that limit, then of course they are not going to entertain your paper and your paper is going to be rejected. Even it won't go to the editor, right? So plagiarism check is absolutely important. So when you are ready to submit, you need to check whether there is advanced understanding that you are going to contribute in the specific research field, right? Whether there is a match between the interest of the journal and the scope of your work, whether you have written the manuscript in a structured way, whether the conclusions that you have drawn are justified, right? Whether you have used international journal references, right? Whether you have formatted your images, tables, and figures, right? And whether you have used spell checks and grammar corrections appropriately, right? So if you get tick mark everywhere, then you are ready for submission. So you can have online submission, right? Manuscript to be submitted, supporting files, covering letter, list of reviewers sometimes they ask for, right? So I will take you through. I think we have got some 20 minutes. So there is some journals ask for research highlights, and research highlights are, for the reader's sake, they would be interested in research highlights. So these are some 4 or 5 bullet points, and typically the limit is 85 characters, right? And by going through the research highlights, the reader will make a call whether this paper is of useful to him or her, whether it will be useful or not, right? So that's why the research highlights would be required. So this is just an illustration of a research highlight that we had prepared for one of our journals. Elsewhere journals typically demand these research highlights, right? So you have said what has been done, what are the results, how the results are validated, and ultimately what is the your finding, right? So just some 4 or 5 bullets maximum. Then you need to be aware about copyright. So sometimes you are required to hand over the copyright to your publisher. Sometimes the copyright stays with you, so you need to go through the copyright provisions, right? Then there is this peer review process that also you need to understand. So this is how you submit the paper. Then initial decision is taken by editor. Either he disregards it or he decides to get your paper reviewed. Then he assigns reviewers, typically 2, 3, 4, right, depending upon the journal policy. Then the reviewers accept the invite, right? The reviewers are supposed to be the experts in that particular area. These are the professors in reputed universities, right? So they go through each and every line of your paper, right? They complete their review, and then they come with their recommendation. So sometimes it could be accept as it is. Sometimes they will make you work on the revision. It could be major revision or minor revision, or sometimes the recommendation would be reject the paper, right? And then it will be this decision will be notified by author. Of course, on only single one review, the editor is not going to make a decision. He will wait till the review of 2 to 3 reviewers reaches him, and based on these reviews, he or she will make a decision, and then it will be notified to the author. So it could be either revision or acceptance. If your paper gets accepted, it will be sent for further process to the publisher, right? If it is not the case, then there is a revision that is required, right? So you are required to make a revision in your paper, right? You need to again work on your paper, and you need to address the reviewer comments, right? And then again, either it will be accepted or rejection. So these are the comments that I have received from the reviewers, that just I wanted to share it with you. So here you can see reviewers. One of the reviewer has said authors have studied on experimental investigation and characterization of shear and squeeze mode MR break, and based on the observation, following comments are made. And then the reviewer has come up with the comments, right? So the technological gap have not been clearly mentioned. Analytical model is in preliminary level, right? So those technical comments, right, the reviewer has shared with you, you need to address these comments, right? You need to work on them, you need to address them, and then you can revise your paper and get back to the journal, right? Sometimes it could be very disappointing, right, that here one of the reviewer has said that the paper is poor and doesn't correspond to the up-to-date level of knowledge in this area. The very important thing is you shouldn't get demotivated, discouraged, right? Even though you may not receive so sometimes the reviewers are very explicit, right, or they are very rude, right? So you shouldn't get discouraged, right? You should go through the comments, right? Sometimes the reviewer provides a very detailed review, like so these 6 comments that he has shared with us, right? And sometimes he could be very crisp, right? So like the review comment that I have shared with you based on one of our paper. So he says that there also lacks some experimental data and the English language requires some improvements. So that could be the case, right? So there could be some language issues, there could be some technical aspects. You need to build on that. But very important thing, the bottom line is that you shouldn't get discouraged, right? Because it's never going to happen that straight away your paper is going to be accepted. Nor it's not going to happen that your reviewer is going to say that okay, this is the best paper that I have come across, right? And it has to be accepted as it is. No, it is not going to happen, right? And then you are going to reframe your response, right? So one illustration that I have come up with. So this could be your response, right? So we have written here, the earlier manuscript was having 4 research highlights. This version of manuscript has been updated to 5 research highlights in the context of addition of experimental results. So the earlier reviewer had said that there lacks some experimental data. So we went back to the laboratory, we conducted some additional experiments, right? And then we included those experimental results in the paper, right? And then we said that the novelty of this paper lies in the fact that the results of this thermal analysis are based on real world drive cycle. Those have been presented and supported with experimental data, right? One more important thing what we have done is the results of experimental evaluation with regard to temperature rise have been added in this version of manuscript, which were not earlier there. And then there was one comment on English language. So we are saying that the English language check has been confirmed with the help of professional English language expert, and accordingly the manuscript has been refined. Okay. So likewise, you need to go back, work on the comments, address those comments, prepare your response, and resubmit your paper, right? And then that will be considered, right? So responding to your comments, you need to be thorough, right? So you need to address each and every comment. You are not supposed to ignore any comment, right? So if there are 4 comments, you need to address all of them or 4 of them, right? Clarity and structure, you need to be you need to bring very much clarity in your argument, and you need to take your time. So typically you will get some 3 or 4 weeks of time to address the reviewers comments, right? So you can be diplomatic, like here you can start your sentence like, we agree with the referee, but, right, the referee is right to point out, but, or yet, whilst we agree with the referee that, and then you can have your own argument here, right? So straightforward, it's better, it is advised that you shouldn't say that okay, the reviewer is wrong, right? Sometimes it may be the case the reviewer could be, two reviewers could be in disagreement, right? One reviewer says that it is a good work and the other reviewer says that it is a poor work. That may happen. Or sometimes it may so happen that you will feel that the reviewer is wrong. He may not have understood the technical aspect of your paper. That might be the case. Comments you don't understand. Sometimes you fail to understand the comment of the reviewer. Sometimes the reviewers are very rude. The language of reviewer is very rude, right? Resubmit or go elsewhere. And then you will have to make a decision that whether you are going to address those comments or you are going to retract and submit somewhere else, right? But you need to be very diplomatic when you are addressing the reviewers comments, right? This is the eureka moment, right? So when your paper gets accepted, right, and then you get on one fine morning, one fine day, you get email from the editor, and then he says that I'm pleased to tell you that your work has now been accepted for publication in SAI's technical papers program, right? And this is a eureka moment, right? So this is where you feel that uh, it has made your day, right? You are a very happy person. And then once your paper has been accepted, right, you need to work further on it. Maybe there is online, it gets published, typically it gets online published within weeks time or 2 weeks time, right? But then it will be sent for the purpose of proofing to you, right? So there would be some corrections that you need to endorse. The corrections would most probably these would have been done by the editor, the publisher, right? And then you need to endorse these corrections, right? So that is what is called as proofing of your article, right? So the reasons when your paper gets rejected is most of the times the works are confirmatory, which means there is no novelty. Already whatever has been done by other papers, you have done the same thing and you have found out the same results. And in that case, your reputed research journal may not accept your paper. Poor experimental design, maybe in terms of poor control or in terms of hypothesis, which has not been adequately tested, or inappropriate for journal. Sometimes it doesn't match with the scope of journal, or sometimes it is not structured way of writing, or language errors are there. So poorly written paper, right? So these are some reasons why your paper may get rejected. There are some myths that you need to understand. So some people say that unless and until you have experimental work, your paper will not be accepted. That is not the case, right? Even if you do some modeling and simulation, right, or you do some statistical analysis, then also there is a chance that your work may get accepted in a reputed journal, right? So though experimental work is desired, right, it is not must, right? Some people say that Indian journals are local. No, there are some highly reputed Indian journals, and being Indian, it's not the case that they are not international, right? They are international journals, right? A journal is international because international appears in its name, right? It has nothing got to do with the word international, right? There are so many paid predatory journals which call themselves as international journals. So international journal is a journal which has got international circulation, right? Just by using the word in the title of journal, the journal doesn't become international, right? It will be better to suggest a reviewer who is known to you. Sometimes the people feel that because sometimes the journal asks you to suggest reviewers, and the people say that okay, XYZ knows me, right? So if I appoint him as a reviewer, then he will review my paper and he will kind of say good thing about my paper, and my paper will be suggested accepted. No, that is not the case. Here the idea is that the journal just wants to update their database of reviewers, right? Your paper may not necessarily go to the reviewer that you have suggested. If you cite earlier papers from the journal where you have submitted your work, your paper will get accepted. Some people feel that if you earlier papers which have got published in that journal, if you put citations of those papers in your right article, then there is a chance of uh, publication. No, that is not the case. It will be easier for publication if your paper goes to the reviewer from certain region or country. So as Indian author, some people feel that okay, if it goes to Chinese or Vietnamese, Japanese reviewer, then there is a chance that it will be accepted. While if it goes to a European reviewer, then it may not get accepted. Again, that is a myth. That is not true. All open access journals are poor quality. No, again, that is a myth. There are some very good journals which are open access, right? But they are highly reputed. And there are some journals who give you both options, right? So point is very important quote. There is no way to get experience except through experience, which means unless and until you try and you take this experience, right, you are not going to get experienced, right? So in order for you to get experienced, you will have to take, you will have to go through such experiences, right? So finally coming to an end, I think we have got some 7-8 minutes. So ultimately journal publication is all about what? Basically a scientific research, your work and the logical writing. You should be equally good in writing as well. Identifying appropriate journal is critical, right? Very important thing is you identify an appropriate journal. An eye towards minute detail is essential, right? So very small things, finer aspects you should not ignore. Never compromise research ethics. Absolutely important. Research ethics are something you should not compromise upon. Scientific writing is an iterative process. Revisions are obvious. So it's not that one go you are going to write the paper and then it will be accepted, right? There are bound to be some revisions, right? Iterative process. Patience is the key. You need to be very patient, right? Typically you start working, you start writing the paper and then it gets published. It takes sometimes even a year, right? More than 6 months, 8 9 months, 1 year, even more than 1 year, right? So that way it may take that much amount of time. So your patience is very important. the pride and immense satisfaction derived through scholarly journal publication is uncomparable or unparalleled, right? So that is the most important thing for me as a researcher. So I acknowledge here the various faculty development programs that I have attended on this subject, and the LCA Research Academy is a good source. We will get very good material over there, right? So with this, I come to an end of this session. I think we have got at least 5 minutes remaining for question answer session. So thank you very much. Still, if you have got any questions or if you want to contact me, right, you can use this email ID. I have got this email ID for you, satyajit.patil@ritindia.edu, and my number here is 9970700710. With this, I stop here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts, right? And let's take up a few questions if you have, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for great knowledge. Hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir. There is one question from Kulkarni, sir. It is necessary to write the thesis in the latex only.
Can you repeat the question?
It is necessary to write the thesis in latex only.
Not necessary, not necessary. But see, this is basically a choice based. It's not compulsory. You cannot make it a compulsion, right? But then yes, at RIT, we have made it compulsory for our MTech students because we want to ensure that they adhere to a common layout and style of writing, right? Otherwise, it becomes very difficult for the supervisor, right, or COE persons to just ensure that all the students have used the same format uh, which has been recommended by the college, right? So that is why we have made it compulsory for our students. But when you go for a journal, when you want to publish, then they may suggest you to use latex, but it's not compulsory, right? It's not compulsory. But yes, there are some features of latex which are user friendly, and then once you get acquainted with, right, then you find it very value added, right? I mean, it takes very less time to format your paper because uh, journal to journal the style may get changed, right? Even for the same publisher, say for example Elsevier, and you have got hundreds of different journals. So I have submitted to one paper to this particular journal, and then I have formatted my paper in accordance with these journal guidelines. Unfortunately, my paper gets rejected. Now I want to switch over from this journal to another journal, but then their formatting style is a bit different. Then I am required to spend some amount of time to adhere to their style, right? To use that format. So in case if I use latex or similar kind of tool, right, here my time and my efforts will get saved, and that is why this option is there with you, right? So but ultimately it's choice based case, right, whether or not to use latex, but there is no compulsion as such, right? I hope that I have addressed this question.
Thank you, sir. I request all participants, if you have any question, you can raise your hand also, or you can text it into the chat box. Dear all participants, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. Ulwani sir, please go ahead.
Sir, during session you have already told us what is the meaning of the H index and I-10 index, but still I am confusing about the what is the difference between H index, I-10 index and G index. Can you clarify it?
Yeah, for example, say for example, if I say that I have H index of 5, right? So H index could, as a person, as a researcher, you have your H index. As an institute, you can have your H index. A journal may have an H index, right? So for example, if I say that I have my H index as 5, what it means is I have got at least 5 papers who have got at least 5 citations each, right? What it means is out of my, say for example, if I have published some 20 odd papers till now, at least there are 5 papers which have got 5 citations each, right? Then my H index is 5. Now I10 index means what? At least there are some 10 papers which have been cited 10 times, right? So I10 means at least you are required to have 10 citations, right? So I10, my say for example I10 is 2, what it means is there are at least my 2 papers which have got 10 citations each, right? So this is what is I10, right? So I guess now it has become clear to you, right? H index and I10
Yes,
index.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So there are some different, metrics which they use, right? This scientific community use, so as to, so these are some ways, these are some methods. So that you want to, so there are two aspects. One is productivity, and another aspect is effectiveness, right? So what happens is researcher could be very productive, but there may not be quality, or sometimes he may not be productive. Say for example, a person like Einstein, he had published only 2 papers. So do you mean to say that he is not productive, right? Okay, he may not be productive, only 2 research papers, but then the kind of impact that he has on the scientific community is very huge, right? It is something, it just comes within once in a century, right? That kind of research he made, right? So as a agency, you want to take into account both considerations, productivity as well as quality. And that is why you come up with different aspects like maybe H index, impact factor, I10 index, right? So there are various ways with the help of which you can express the contribution of a journal or a researcher or an institute as such. And that is why you have got this variety of indices, right? I guess I'm clear with this.
Yes, I request to all participants, if you have any question, you can raise your hand. I think all the queries of all participants are clear. So I request Mr. Yadav, sir. Hello, Mr. Mahesh Yadav.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
just what
Please
I
go
would
ahead.
like to say here is, even though if the participants have any questions, maybe you can contact me on my WhatsApp, or maybe you can write a mail to me, right? And that is okay for me, right? If right now you are not in a position to share your query or question, right? Feel free to contact me, right? With this note, I think we should stop here, and I hand it over to the organizers. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your patient listening. Yeah, thank you.
Mahesh Yadav, sir. It's hand over to you.
Thank you. Okay, am I audible, sir? Yes, sir. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. So, good morning, everyone. Here is Mr. M.S. Yadav, working as a lecturer in Department of Civil Engineering. First of all, on the behalf of Department of Civil Engineering Diploma Wing, I would like to express our sincere thanks to today's resource person, respected Dr. S.R. Patil, sir, Dean QA at RIT, for accepting our invitation and conducting such a wonderful and informative session. During his whole session, Sir has explained many new things like how to find appropriate journal, concept of impact factor, concept of H index, concept of citation, difference between green open access journal and gold open access journal, how should be the article structure, concept of authorship, concept of plagiarism, and process of peer review journals. Those all things are very useful and important while writing and publishing any research paper. Definitely, all those things will help us in our future research work. Thank you, sir, for your valuable time and guidance. Also, we expect same cooperation and guidance from you in future. Thank you so much, sir. Also, I want to express my thanks to all dear participants for your active presence and listening whole session sincerely without any interruption. Thank you all. And at last, I would like to express my sincere thanks to my team for proper management of this whole session. Thank you all. And now I request Yes, sir, to please share a feedback link with all participants so that we will assist ourselves to improve our performance. Is it shared or not,
Yes,
sir?
sir. The link
Yes,
is
sir.
already shared. Link is already shared, sir.
Okay.
All participants are
Okay.
requested to please
So I request.
fill the
Ah,
feedback.
okay.
Yeah,
So
so
all
thank you very much,
will
organizers. I think I should take a
okay.
leave now.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's my
Okay, sir.
pleasure
Thank you,
to
sir.
share with you whatever I have with me. Thank you very much. Right? I shall
Thank
leave
you, sir.
now.
Thank you,
Right?
sir.
With this,
Yes,
okay.
sir.
With this, I announce that today's session is over, and you may leave the meeting. Thank you. Thank you all.